Imagine a battlefield scenario where opposing generals are so profoundly terrified of a single enemy combatant's weaponry that they routinely choose to unconditionally surrender their own territory rather than engage him in direct combat.
Right. They look at the tactical map, they calculate the odds of survival, and they just decide that a guaranteed self-inflicted casualty is, well, it's vastly preferable to the absolute devastation this lone soldier can unleash.
Exactly. And in the early 2000s, you have to understand that this was not a theoretical military strategy. That was Major League Baseball attempting to survive Barry Bonds.
It really was.
Welcome to this special Peak to Dust deep dive. You are joining us for a serious investigative overview of a saga that fundamentally altered the landscape of American sports.
Yeah.
We are embarking on a detailed examination of the rise, the unprecedented peak, and the tragic, controversial fall of a baseball icon.
And to conduct this investigation, we have assembled a massive and comprehensive stack of source materials. We will not be relying on folklore or sentiment here.
No, not at all.
Instead, we were analyzing decades of historical box scores, dense statistical models, federal grand jury testimonies, legal indictments.
The actual court documents.
Right, the court documents, plus excerpts from the landmark investigative book Game of Shadows, and contemporary journalistic reporting from the era. Our mission is to dissect the facts with absolute precision. We are looking at a man who broke the mathematics of his sport, and we are going to examine exactly how that happened.
Both biologically and statistically. The tone of this deep dive reflects the extreme gravity of the subject matter. This is not merely a baseball story about home runs and accolades. It is a dramatic, almost Shakespearean epic about the relentless pursuit of immortality, the absolute biological limits of human athletic performance, and the devastating, irreversible cost of a tainted legacy.
It's a heavy subject.
It is. We ask you to set aside preconceived notions as we analyze the mechanics of greatness and the architecture of a downfall. Because to understand the sheer magnitude of Bonds' eventual collision with federal authorities, you cannot start at the end. You have to understand the foundation.
And that foundation is entirely unique in the history of American professional sports. Barry Bonds did not arrive in the major leagues as an unknown entity fighting for recognition. He was born into the absolute royalty of the sport.
The bloodlines are incredible.
They are. He is the son of Bobby Bonds, who was a fierce competitor and a 3-time Gold Glove winner. Bobby achieved the exceedingly rare combination of hitting 30 home runs and stealing 30 bases in 5 separate seasons.
Just to give you a sense of how difficult that is, most players will never achieve a 30-30 season once in their entire careers, let alone 5 times.
Exactly. And furthermore, Barry Bonds is the godson of Hall of Famer Willie Mays.
Wow.
Right? A man widely considered by baseball historians to be the most complete 5-tool player in the history of the game.
That royal pedigree is crucial to our investigation because it instilled in him 2 opposing forces. First, an elite, almost supernatural understanding of the game from a young age, but second, a crushing psychological burden.
The expectations were insurmountable.
Right, you have to look at the context of his father's career. Bobby Bonds, despite his incredible statistics and blazing speed, was heavily criticized throughout his career for never quite living up to the impossible, suffocating expectation of being, the next Willie Mays.
Because when your godfather is the greatest living baseball player, mere excellence is viewed as a disappointment.
It's a failure. Barry inherited that exact same pressure. The expectation was not just that he would be a professional, but that he would be a savior. From his earliest days, his raw physical talent was undeniable. In 1982, as a high school senior, he was drafted by the San Francisco Giants, the very franchise his father and godfather had played for.
And they offered him a $75,000 contract, which was a significant sum for an 18-year-old at that time.
But he turned it down. He chose instead to attend Arizona State University to further hone his skills.
And his 3 years at Arizona State, they serve as a perfect microcosm for his entire public life, really, demonstrating both his extraordinary capability on the field and the intensely abrasive, isolating personality that would haunt his career until its bitter end.
Yeah, statistically, he was dominant in the collegiate ranks. He batted .347, launched 45 home runs, and drove in 175 runs over his tenure. He was a force of nature in the batter's box.
Yet off the field, he was a deeply polarizing and alienating figure. The source materials detail a series of incidents, accusations of petty theft, constantly missed curfews, a controversial pine tar incident during a game.
And, astonishingly, a nearly unanimous team-wide vote by his own teammates to kick him off the baseball team.
Right.
I mean, you hear about players having friction with teammates, but a unanimous vote for expulsion is entirely different. It speaks to a fundamental inability to connect.
Exactly. His college coach, Jim Brock, noted in his reflections that while Bonds was incredibly talented, perhaps the most talented player he had ever seen, he was also viewed by those around him as rude, inconsiderate, and entirely self-centered.
Which is a devastating assessment.
It is. Brock observed that Bonds never figured out how to get people to like him. He prioritized athletic performance over interpersonal relationships, essentially building a fortress around himself where statistics were the only currency that mattered.
And that exact dynamic, that fortress mentality, followed him directly into the professional ranks. After refining his game at Arizona State, he was drafted 6th overall by the Pittsburgh Pirates in 1985.
He moved quickly through the minor leagues.
Very quickly. He debuted in the major leagues in May of 1986, just shy of his 22nd birthday. By the time the calendar turned to 1990, he had completely transformed the Pirates from an afterthought into a powerhouse franchise, winning his first National League Most Valuable Player award.
Let's look at the raw numbers from that 1990 season, because they are vital. He batted .301, hit 33 home runs, drove in 114 runs, and stole 52 bases.
But it's the more advanced metrics that our sources highlight that truly show his value.
Yes. He led the league with a .565 slugging percentage and a 9.7 wins above replacement, or WAR.
We must pause to explain wins above replacement to you, as it is the most critical metric for understanding the totality of a player's impact. WAR is not a traditional statistic like a batting average.
No, it's much more comprehensive. It is a calculation that combines a player's offensive production, their defensive runs saved in the field, and their base running value. And then it compares that total package to what a theoretical replacement-level player, like an average minor league call-up, would produce in that exact same role.
So if a player has a WAR of 2.0, they are considered a solid everyday starter. A WAR of 5.0 is an all-star caliber season.
Right. And in 1990, Barry Bonds posted a 9.7 WAR. That means his presence on the field mathematically secured nearly 10 more victories for the Pittsburgh Pirates than they would have achieved with an average left fielder.
He was essentially carrying the weight of an entire franchise on his shoulders. He followed that 1990 campaign with another MVP award just 2 years later in 1992. And this is a season that requires very careful statistical analysis to fully appreciate.
Because the numbers begin to look less like a human athlete and more like a mathematical anomaly.
Exactly.
The defining metric of his 1992 season is his on-base plus slugging plus, abbreviated as OPS plus exciled. To contextualize this for you, OPS plus is designed to normalize offensive production across the entire league. It adjusts for external factors like the dimensions of different ballparks.
Right, because hitting in Colorado is different than hitting in New York.
Precisely. In this system, an OPS plus of 100 represents the exact league average. If you have an OPS plus of 110, you are 10% better than the average hitter.
Okay, so in 1992, Barry Bonds posted an OPS plus of 204. Just to make sure we are unpacking the gravity of that number correctly, an OPS plus of 204 means Barry Bonds was mathematically worth more than 2 average Major League Baseball players combined standing in the batter's box.
That is exactly what it means. His dominance was absolute. He was reaching base safely and hitting for extra bases at a rate that effectively doubled the output of a standard professional hitter. He led the Pirates to 3 consecutive division titles from 1990 to 1992.
Asserting himself as the undisputed best player in the National League.
Without a doubt.
Yet, despite this overwhelming individual brilliance, his tenure in Pittsburgh concluded in a profound tragedy that defined a generation for Pirates fans. It wasn't a failure of statistics over a season. It was a failure in a single agonizing moment.
The 1992 National League Championship Series.
Yes. Against the Atlanta Braves, it went to a decisive Game 7. We have to look closely at the mechanics of this specific play, because it serves as the brutal concluding chapter of his time in Pittsburgh. In the bottom of the 9th inning, with the Pirates leading, the Braves mounted a rally.
A base hit was lined into left field.
Bonds, a multi-time Gold Glove winner known for his defensive prowess, charged the ball. The runner rounding third base was Sid Bream, a player notoriously known as one of the slowest runners in professional baseball.
The physical reality of the play is stark. Our sources detail how Bonds fielded the ball cleanly, but his throw to home plate lacked the necessary velocity and accuracy.
It drifted up the first baseline.
Right, forcing the catcher to reach back. Sid Bream slid across home plate, beating the tag by a fraction of a second, scoring the series-clinching run that sent the Braves to the World Series and eliminated the Pirates.
The image of Bonds kneeling in left field as the Braves celebrated is burned into the history of the sport. It's devastating. Following that failure, and after years of intense feuding with Pirates management over his salary demands, as well as a highly antagonistic relationship with the local media regarding his perceived arrogance, he departed Pittsburgh via free agency.
And the quote he gave upon his departure was chilling.
It really was.
He told reporters, "And if I do leave, I'll haunt the Pittsburgh Pirates. They'll be the one team I beat up on."
It was a cold, calculated promise of retribution.
And he immediately acted on that promise by signing a record-breaking 6-year, $43.75 million contract with the San Francisco Giants, returning to his home state of California and putting on the same uniform his father and godfather had worn.
The impact was instantaneous. He won the 1993 MVP award in his very first season in San Francisco, hitting 46 home runs and compiling 123 runs batted in. Throughout the remainder of the 1990s, he established himself as the premier force in Major League Baseball.
He entered the highly exclusive 300 home run, 300 stolen base club, and eventually became the first player to ever reach the 400 club.
Which is just staggering.
It is. These were combinations of raw power and elite sprint speed that had never before been witnessed in the century-long history of the sport.
Which brings us to a critical analytical juncture in our deep dive.
Mm-hmm.
You have to pause the timeline right here at the conclusion of the 1999 season. This is before any whispers of scandal.
Before the drastic physical transformations that would alter his silhouette.
Yes, and before the federal investigations began. We must evaluate his historical standing based solely on this first phase of his career. If Barry Bonds had simply retired at the end of the 1990s at the age of 35, an age when almost all athletes face severe physical decline, what would his historical standing be?
The statistical evidence provided in our sources offers a definitive and staggering answer to that exact question. We return to the metric of wins above replacement.
Okay.
If you were to take Barry Bonds' career and mathematically strip away all 7 of his MVP seasons entirely...
Wait, erasing his 7 best seasons?
Yes. Erasing the absolute best, most dominant years of his career from the record books, he would still possess a career WAR of 90.7.
To put that 90.7 WAR into perspective for you, we have to compare it to a universally beloved contemporary. Look at Hall of Famer Ken Griffey Jr., a player considered the gold standard of natural talent in that era, a player who never faced allegations of chemical enhancement.
Ken Griffey Jr. finished his entire illustrious 22-year career with an 83.8 WAR.
It is a striking comparison. Without his 7 best seasons, Barry Bonds was still demonstrably more valuable on a baseball field than Ken Griffey Jr. was over his entire lifetime in the sport.
By the end of 1999, Barry Bonds was already indisputably a first-ballot Hall of Famer. He had secured his legacy.
But having that undeniable baseline of generational talent at age 35 is usually where the story ends for a professional athlete. The knees deteriorate, the fast-twitch muscle fibers lose their elasticity, the bat speed noticeably slows when trying to catch up to a 95-mile-per-hour fastball.
That's the normal biological curve.
Right. What happens next with Bonds completely breaks our understanding of human biology and athletic aging. Having established a Hall of Fame career by age 35, he did not fade. Instead, he shattered the boundaries of statistical possibility, forcing us to examine an era of dominance unmatched in baseball history. It leads us into an unprecedented peak, covering the years 2000 to 2004.
The acceleration became undeniable in the 2001 season. Bonds, at the age of 36, set out to shatter the single-season home run record of 70, which had been established just 3 years prior by Mark McGwire during the highly publicized 1998 home run chase.
And Bonds did not just break the record, he annihilated it, hitting 73 home runs in a single campaign.
Furthermore, he posted a slugging percentage of .863, obliterating a record that Babe Ruth had held since 1920.
Over 80 years.
Exactly. He posted an overall OPS of 1.379. He was hitting a home run every 6.5 times he stepped to the plate.
These numbers flatly defy traditional athletic aging curves. But while the 73 home runs captured the headlines and the public's imagination, our sources indicate that it was his absolute terrifying mastery of the strike zone in the subsequent years that truly broke the fundamental mechanics of the game of baseball.
The sheer terror he instilled in opposing pitchers from 2002 to 2004 is almost difficult to articulate without sounding hyperbolic. But the cold mathematics bear it out.
They really do.
In 2002, at the age of 38, he won his first career batting title with a .370 average. He also drew a record 198 walks, 68 of which were intentional. Pitchers simply refused to throw the ball over the plate.
But it is the 2004 season that stands as the ultimate statistical anomaly in the history of organized sports. We have to spend time dissecting this 2004 season because you may never see numbers like this again in any professional sport.
No, it's highly unlikely. In 2004, Barry Bonds orchestrated the most disciplined and devastating offensive season ever recorded. He reached base over 60% of the time he stepped into the batter's box, posting a .609 on-base percentage.
That's unreal.
He slugged .812, resulting in an astronomical 1.422 OPS. Let us examine the walk rates because they reveal the psychology of the opposing teams. He accumulated 232 total walks, breaking his own previous record.
And of those 232 walks, exactly 120 were intentional bases on balls. Opposing managers held up 4 fingers and intentionally walked him 120 times.
To understand how absurd that is, the next closest player in all of baseball that year was Jim Thome.
With how many?
26 intentional walks.
It is a staggering paradox. You are looking at the most dangerous, violent power hitter on the planet, a man capable of hitting a baseball 500 feet, and he was simultaneously the most disciplined, patient contact hitter in the game.
You mentioned his home runs earlier. How did his strikeout numbers look during this period?
That is where the statistics become almost surreal. In 2004, despite taking huge aggressive swings meant to drive the ball out of the park, Bonds hit 45 home runs but only struck out 41 times all season.
Wait, really?
Yes, he hit more home runs than he had strikeouts. To further contextualize this dominance for you, we can look at his performance against specific, legendary pitchers who terrorized the rest of the league. Let's take Randy Johnson.
The big unit.
Right, standing 6'10", throwing a high 90s fastball and a devastating slider. Johnson was a left-handed pitcher who routinely made left-handed hitters look foolish. It's considered a physical mismatch. Yet against Randy Johnson, Barry Bonds batted .306 with a .452 on-base percentage and a .551 slugging percentage across 62 career plate appearances.
Johnson could not solve him.
No. Furthermore, looking at a broader timeline from 1993 to 2007, Barry Bonds was intentionally walked more times than entire Major League franchises were over that same span.
Our sources confirm he had more intentional walks as an individual than the entire rosters of the Twins, Rangers, White Sox, Orioles, Athletics, Blue Jays, Royals, and Tigers.
The level of fear he generated dictated the strategy of every opposing manager in the league. They were forced to calculate the mathematical probability of survival against him, and they routinely concluded that engaging him in the strike zone was a guaranteed loss.
Which brings us back to that military standoff analogy from the beginning of our deep dive.
Yes, you have to picture the tension in the stadium. The bases are loaded. The game is on the line. The standard operating procedure in baseball for 100 years has been to pitch to the batter and try to get an out.
Right.
Because walking a batter with the bases loaded automatically forces in a run.
Right. It's conceding a point.
But managers were so paralyzed by the threat of Bonds hitting a grand slam that they made the conscious, tactical decision to intentionally walk him with the bases loaded. They willingly surrendered a guaranteed run rather than give Barry Bonds the opportunity to swing the bat. They chose the lesser casualty.
But this late career explosion, defying all laws of human aging and athletic biology, attracted the attention of federal investigators.
Leading us into the dark shadow cast over his achievements.
Exactly. This is where the narrative transitions from the geometry of the baseball diamond into the sterile, chemical underbelly of clandestine laboratories that fueled this ascent.
The federal investigation centered around a facility known as the Bay Area Laboratory Cooperative, or BELCO. Our sources, including federal indictments and investigative reporting, outline the structure of this operation. BELCO was founded by a man named Victor Conte.
And the laboratory utilized the highly specialized expertise of a chemist named Patrick Arnold. Arnold was responsible for synthesizing and creating undetectable designer steroids. These were drugs specifically engineered to beat the anti-doping tests of the era.
And these substances were distributed under incredibly unassuming names. There was the Clear, which is a designer steroid technically known as THG, and the Cream, which was a testosterone-based ointment applied transdermally.
The crucial link connecting the Belko laboratory directly to Barry Bonds was his personal weight trainer, a man named Greg Anderson. Bonds and Anderson were not merely professional acquaintances. They were boyhood friends who reconnected in 1998.
The timeline of this reconnection is vital to our investigation. 1998 was the exact year that Bonds, despite being the best player in baseball, was entirely overshadowed by the massive media spectacle of Mark McGwire and Sammy Sosa's chemically fueled home run chase.
Right, Bonds watched players with inferior natural talent receive unprecedented global adoration. And shortly thereafter, he began working intensely with Anderson.
The operation remained hidden until September 3, 2003, when federal investigators, led by IRS Special Agent Jeff Nowitzki, executed a coordinated raid on the Ballyfoo facilities in Burlingame, California.
They seized financial documents, emails, and medical records. And 2 days later, they raided Greg Anderson's private residence.
During this second raid, investigators discovered detailed doping calendars, human growth hormone, and documents that explicitly linked Barry Bonds to the banned substances. This overwhelming federal action compelled a massive grand jury investigation. The government was determined to uncover the depth of the doping ring.
In December 2003, Barry Bonds was called to testify under oath before this federal grand jury. Let's look closely at what happened in that room.
Okay.
During his testimony, Bonds admitted to using both the substance known as the cream and the substance known as the clear, which were provided to him by Greg Anderson.
However, Bonds presented a very specific defense. He claimed under oath that Anderson had told him these substances were perfectly legal over-the-counter supplements.
Right. He testified that he was told the clear was merely nutritional flaxseed oil and the cream was simply a topical rubbing balm to treat his arthritis. He stated definitively that he never knowingly took performance-enhancing drugs.
Because grand jury proceedings are strictly confidential, this testimony was meant to remain sealed from public view. However, it was illegally leaked by an attorney connected to the case, Troy Ellerman, to reporters at the San Francisco Chronicle.
And the resulting explosive news reports, along with the subsequent publication of the meticulously researched book Game of Shadows by investigative journalists Mark Feiner-Uwada and Lance Williams, laid bare the entire architecture of the doping regimen.
The public was suddenly confronted with a highly detailed, deeply uncomfortable account of how Bonds had transformed his physique, gaining massive amounts of muscle mass in his late 30s and altering his performance through advanced chemistry. But wait, I need to stop you right there because this raises a critical mechanical question about the nature of the cheating itself.
Go ahead.
You might be listening to this and thinking, okay, he took steroids, he got bigger. But baseball requires elite hand-eye coordination and timing. You have a fraction of a second to read the spin of a 95-mile-per-hour pitch, recognize the location, and execute a swing.
That's true.
Steroids do not improve your eyesight. They do not improve your ability to recognize a slider. So how exactly does a designer steroid, which primarily builds muscle mass, turn a highly skilled hitter into a mathematically unstoppable force?
That is a vital distinction, and it goes to the core of why these specific drugs were so devastatingly effective in baseball. The testimony of the biochemist Patrick Arnold provides the biological and mechanical answer. The substances did not merely build raw, bulky mass. They fundamentally altered the body's muscle recovery systems and even neurological concentration.
Really? Neurological concentration?
Yes. Arnold noted in his testimonies that these specific designer steroids allowed for unprecedented recovery times. Normally, a baseball player playing 162 games a year breaks down physically. With the clear and the cream, Bonds could train with maximum intensity in the weight room, step onto the field, and experience virtually zero muscular fatigue.
So he was stepping into the batter's box in August, feeling as fresh as he did on opening day in April.
Exactly. And mechanically, this newfound unnatural strength allowed him to alter his swing. He was able to generate terrifying bat speed and torque through the hitting zone. Furthermore, the added strength allowed Bonds to utilize a very specific type of equipment.
The maple bat.
Right. He began swinging a heavily choked up, highly dense maple bat. Maple is harder than traditional ash, but it is heavier and harder to control.
But Bonds' chemically enhanced strength allowed him to wield this dense maple bat with the precision of a much lighter piece of wood, effectively creating a much larger, more rigid sweet spot.
Precisely. Therefore, a pitch on the outer half of the plate that a normal batter might hit as a routine 350-foot fly out to the warning track was suddenly propelled 400 feet into the bleachers by Bonds.
He already possessed the elite timing and the Hall of Fame eye. The steroid simply ensured that the explosive kinetic energy transferred to the baseball was chemically maximized on every single swing.
It was a perfect, devastating storm of skill and science.
And the federal net began to close precisely as Bonds was closing in on the most hallowed milestone in American sports, creating a surreal and agonizing collision of triumph and disgrace. Right as the federal government was closing its trap, Bonds was stepping into the batter's box to break the all-time home run record.
The tension was palpable across the country. On August 7, 2007, Barry Bonds hit his 756th career home run, officially surpassing the legendary Hank Aaron to become the all-time home run king.
But the atmosphere surrounding the achievement was incredibly heavy with suspicion, resentment, and a profound sense of illegitimacy.
Hank Aaron himself, a revered figure in American sports, deliberately chose not to attend the game. He offered only a brief pre-recorded video message on the stadium screen.
The intense public backlash was perhaps best encapsulated by what happened to the record-breaking baseball itself. This is one of the most fascinating cultural artifacts of the entire saga.
The Mark Echo ball.
Exactly. The ball was caught in the stands and eventually put up for auction. Fashion designer Mark Echo purchased the baseball for $752,000. Yeah. But instead of just putting it in a private display case, Echo created a public website allowing fans across the country to vote on the ball's ultimate fate.
He offered 3 options, right? Give it to the Hall of Fame as is, shoot it into space, or permanently brand it.
Right. And the overwhelming public consensus, driven by anger over the Bale C scandal, was to brand the baseball with a physical asterisk before sending it to the National Baseball Hall of Fame in Cooperstown. It was a highly visible, permanent, physical symbol of cheating, forever marking his greatest achievement as illegitimate.
The consequences for Bonds moved swiftly from the court of public opinion to a literal court of law. Just 3 months after breaking Hank Aaron's record in November 2007, Barry Bonds was formally indicted by a federal grand jury on charges of perjury and obstruction of justice.
These charges stem directly from his 2003 testimony where he claimed, under oath, that he thought the substances provided by Greg Anderson were flaxseed oil and arthritis balm.
The government was accusing him of intentionally lying to a grand jury to cover up his steroid use.
The trial, formally docketed as United States v. Bonds, finally commenced in March 2011 after years of legal maneuvering. And the prosecution strategy ran into a massive, unmoving roadblock from the very outset in the form of Greg Anderson.
Right. Greg Anderson, Bonds' longtime friend and trainer, refused to cooperate with the federal government. He repeatedly refused to testify against Bonds, citing various legal protections, and chose instead to be jailed for contempt of court on multiple occasions.
Wow.
This refusal severely compromised the prosecution. Without Anderson on the witness stand to authenticate the physical doping calendars seized in the 2003 raid, or to testify to the conversations they had regarding the substances, the prosecution was forced to rely on circumstantial evidence.
They had to rely on character witnesses to prove that Bonds explicitly knew he was ingesting steroids. The testimonies they did present, however, were devastating to Bonds' character and painted a very clear picture of a man undergoing severe chemical alterations.
The prosecution called his former mistress, Kimberly Bell, to the stand.
And she testified in vivid detail to extreme physical and psychological changes in Bonds starting around the year 2000. She described instances of severe mood swings, suddenly aggressive and controlling behavior, and notably, a physical shrinking of his testicles, all of which are widely documented medical side effects of anabolic steroid abuse.
She also testified to a financial detail that pointed toward deliberate concealment, stating that Bonds had given her $80,000 to purchase a house, but had distributed the money in increments of exactly $9,000.
Purposefully staying under the $10,000 threshold that triggers automatic IRS reporting.
Exactly. Furthermore, the prosecution brought in former Major League players, including brothers Jason and Jeremy Giambi. Both men admitted under oath to using the exact same steroids provided by Greg Anderson.
Crucially, both brothers testified that Anderson had explicitly told them that the Balco substances, the clear and the cream, were in fact powerful, undetectable steroids.
The implication being that if Anderson told the Giambi brothers what the drugs were, he certainly would have told his primary client and childhood friend, Barry Bonds.
You look at the sheer volume of this evidence. You have the failed amphetamine test in 2006, the drastic, undeniable physical changes to his skull size and muscle mass, The testimonies of the Giambi brothers, the detailed doping calendars with his initials on them, and the direct statements from Beldell's own chemist regarding the nature of the drugs.
It's a mountain of evidence.
Right. So the obvious question you have to ask is, if the physical evidence and witness testimonies regarding his steroid use were so vast, why did the government fail to convict him of perjury?
To understand the outcome, we must strictly analyze the legal burden of proof required in a federal perjury trial. The prosecution did not merely have to prove to the jury that Barry Bonds took steroids. That was not the charge.
Right, it was perjury.
Exactly. They had to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that Bonds intentionally and knowingly lied when he claimed he subjectively believed the substances were flaxseed oil and arthritis balm.
Which is incredibly difficult to do.
Because Greg Anderson refused to take the stand, the government could not legally authenticate the calendars as evidence. More importantly, they could not produce the one man on earth who could testify, under oath and subject to cross-examination, that he explicitly said the words, "Barry, these are steroids," directly to Bonds.
So it came down to proving state of mind.
Exactly. The defense team, led by high-profile attorney Alan Ruby, successfully argued that the government could not definitively prove what was inside Barry Bonds' head in 2003. They argued that Bonds was a trusting athlete who took what his trainer gave him without asking questions.
And the jury may very well have believed Bonds was lying. Common sense might dictate that he's lying. But in a federal courtroom, the prosecution failed to meet the rigorous, exacting legal standard required to prove that lie beyond a reasonable doubt.
The verdict was delivered in April 2011, and it was a mixed, deeply frustrating result for the federal prosecutors. The jury found Bonds guilty of one single count of obstruction of justice.
This charge was related to a rambling, highly evasive answer he gave the grand jury when asked if Greg Anderson had ever provided him with injectable substances.
However, the jury definitively deadlocked on all the perjury charges, resulting in a mistrial on those counts.
Judge Susan Ilston sentenced Bonds to 2 years of probation, 30 days of house arrest, a $4,000 fine, and 250 hours of community service.
It is critical to note for the historical record that the legal battle did not end there. After years of appeals by Bonds' legal team, this sole conviction for obstruction of justice was heavily reviewed by an appellate panel and ultimately overturned by the 9th U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals in 2015.
The court ruled that his evasive answer was not material to the grand jury's investigation. Legally speaking, he was entirely cleared.
But escaping a federal conviction does not mean escaping consequence.
No. Though he largely escaped the confines of a prison cell, the court of public opinion and the gatekeepers of baseball history handed down a much longer, harsher sentence.
This brings us to the final chapter of our investigation: the exclusion and the legacy. Barry Bonds walked out of the courtroom a free man, but the exile from the game of baseball was immediate, absolute, and unprecedented.
Following the 2007 season, the year he broke the home run record, Barry Bonds became a free agent. Despite being 42 years old and surrounded by the intense media circus of the indictment, his statistical production was still elite.
Incredible, really. In his final season, he posted an OPS plus of 169. That means at age 42, facing federal charges, he was still mathematically 69% better than the average major league hitter.
He possessed 762 career home runs, 2,558 walks, and 7 MVP awards. Any team evaluating purely on on-field value would want him in their lineup.
Yet he was completely blacklisted. The sources confirmed that not a single one of the 30 Major League Baseball franchises offered him a contract for the 2008 season.
Not a single team even offered him the league minimum salary to serve as a designated hitter.
The management across the league collectively decided that the toxic media environment, the federal indictment, and the stain of the steroid allegations heavily outweighed his statistical value. He was forced into an involuntary retirement, entirely exiled from the very game he had dominated for 2 decades.
The ultimate lasting judgment, however, was not delivered by the team owners, but by the Baseball Writers Association of America, the BBWAA. These are the journalists who hold the keys to the National Baseball Hall of Fame in Cooperstown.
For a player with Bonds' statistical profile, induction is traditionally a unanimous formality on the very first ballot. The voting process shouldn't take more than 5 minutes.
Instead, the BBWAA subjected him to a decade of profound, highly publicized rejection.
For his entire 10-year period of eligibility on the traditional writers' ballot, from 2013 to 2022, the writers refused to vote him in. They cited the character clause in the Hall of Fame voting rules, actively punishing him for the performance-enhancing drug allegations and the permanent stain he left on the sport's most sacred records.
He never reached the required 75% threshold required for induction. Now, it is a crucial detail to note that his story does contain a quiet postscript to a very loud public exile.
Right. After failing on the BBWAA ballot, our sources indicate that his case was eventually taken up by a specialized committee. In December of 2024, he was finally elected to the Hall of Fame by the Contemporary Baseball Era Committee,
Which is a small group of executives, historians, and former players. But this backdoor induction, achieved years after his primary eligibility expired, does not erase the sting of the decade-long rejection by the writers who covered him daily.
No, and that rejection was deeply compounded by the tragic isolation of his own making. We established early on that Bonds possessed an abrasive personality. Throughout his career, he cultivated a media-shy, intensely defensive posture.
He maintained private enclaves in the clubhouse, setting up double lockers and reclining chairs. He traveled with a massive entourage of personal trainers, massage therapists, and public relations staff, operating entirely outside the team structure.
He routinely alienated his teammates and treated the press with open hostility. When the Belos scandal broke and the federal government closed in, he found that he had systematically burned every bridge available to him.
He had built a fortress, but he was trapped inside it alone. He had no allies to defend his character in the media. He had no former teammates rushing to the microphones to advocate for his integrity.
The devastating nature of this isolation is best summarized by a haunting reflection Bonds himself offered to a reporter late in his life. Looking back on the wreckage of his legacy, the fractured relationships, and the asterisk on his records, he described his existence with brutal honesty. He said, "I feel like a ghost in a big empty house just rattling around."
It is a chilling quote.
He had achieved the ultimate statistical immortality he so desperately sought, but the pursuit of that immortality left him entirely alone.
As we conclude this deep dive, we want to leave you with a complex ethical and statistical paradox to ponder. It requires looking at the era as a whole, rather than just the man in isolation. You might be listening and thinking, he cheated, the records are fake, end of story.
But consider the context of the era in which he played.
If Barry Bonds achieved his impossible mind-bending records during the absolute height of the steroid era, a time when countless pitchers standing on the mound trying to strike him out were secretly using the exact same performance-enhancing drugs provided by the exact same clandestine laboratories, does his absolute statistical dominance actually prove his unmatched genius?
It's a fascinating question.
In a league of artificially enhanced giants, was Barry Bonds simply the greatest giant of them all?
It is a question that offers no easy answers. It forces us to reconcile the messy, flawed morality of the sport with the cold, hard, undeniable mathematics of his achievements.
Thank you for joining us on this serious exploration of tainted legacy. Until our next investigation, this has been The Deep Dive.